Welcome. We will continue on with our talks about the Qabala. We will start with a little recap of what was covered on the previous time, and then we will continue by fleshing out and building up and demonstrating the structure of the tree. And the purpose of this is just to, I suppose, paint the picture of this symbol so that it is in the background of your mind when we begin to flesh out some of the more individual aspects of the tree and how they pertain to man, your mind, to the cosmos itself. First, let us recall, in the previous talk, we found that the Kabbalistic tree of life, or the Qabala, the tree of life, is made of three vertical pillars. You can see it there in front of you. We have the right pillar on your right looking at it, the right pillar of mercy and force, the left pillar of severity and form, and the vertical pillar in the middle is the middle pillar of equilibrium and harmony. We also saw the near seamless mapping of the tree of life, which appears to mirror the structure and function of the brain, with the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere, and the corpus callosum. And the Kabbalistic tree of life is structured around three pillars, as we said: the pillar of mercy on the right, pillar of severity on the left, and the pillar of equilibrium in the center. These pillars form the foundational trunk of the tree. Upon them rest the 10 Sephirot. Sephirot is where we get the word sphere from. And you can see there's 10 circles. Call them spheres if you're more comfortable with that word. And these spheres are symbolic cities, if you will, which introduce differentiation, separation, distance, space, and time into the otherwise unified divine reality, right? So each of these spheres adds a building block of reality as we understand it. Each Sephira is like a distinct city possessing its own character, atmosphere, customs, and inhabitants. Each represents a unique aspect or quality of our nature, if you are looking at it as a map of man's mind, right? And understanding that built into the Tree of Life philosophy is that the mapping of man's mind is also the mapping of the cosmos, right? And we will pour over some of these links and correspondences as we continue to go, right? So yeah, they represent a unique aspect of our quality of our nature and a particular mode of consciousness. The Sephirot are linked by 22 paths, which serve as roads of movement and transformation. Traveling these paths from one Sephirat to another, horizontally, vertically, or diagonally, symbolizes the inner journey through different parts of the self, from Hod, bottom left on the left-hand pillar, which is the intellect, to Tiferet, which is the middle sphere in the middle pillar, number 6, which is heart and harmony. From Malkut, which is the bottom sphere, the very, very bottom, number 10, which is the physical world, or what it's known as the kingdom, to Yesod, which is the sphere directly above it, number 9, the foundation, which is the etheric and imaginative realm, where dreams reside. And from Hesed, on the middle pillar on the right-hand side, which is expansive mercy, a kind of beneficent ruler for the people, for culture, for society, right? Always giving, always welcoming. To Gebura, which is totally opposite on the left-hand side, number 5, which is a contracting severity, right? The individual will juxtaposed against the will of the many, right? Or for the good of the many. There's an antagonism there, but there's also a balance to be found between the two. So we have the full descent from Keter, which is divine unity at the very, very top, number 1, called the crown, to Malkut. So if we start from 1 and drop vertically, totally down to number 10, we go from number 1 to number 10, which is, you may say, God itself, to the physical materialization of God in the world, right? So the world becomes an emanation or a physical manifestation or expression of God. So the descent from Keter to Malkut represents the outgoing creative impulse, often described as the flaming sword or lightning flash. And the return ascent from Malkut, from the bottom, to Keter at the top, is the path of awakening and reunion, right? The individual's journey. Contemplation of the tree naturally gives rise to mythology. The enduring stories trace a hero's movement along these paths, different challenges, different terrains, different characters there are met. The revelation of hidden aspects of their nature, the journey outward into the world only to return transformed, yet somehow to the same essential self that was always latent within them, right? So yes, you are the same person, but there are elements that are drawn out of you by your experience, right? So yes, you retain a semblance of core identity, which is the I, but there's a change that happens too, right? So it's a bizarre thing. You stay the same, yet you continuously change. With myths, every wordy myth will hold this central human tension, the interplay between who we are born as, our innate potential or our divine spark, if you will, and who we become through the choices we make along the way. This fundamental duality lives in every heart, the pull between origin and destiny, between essence and becoming, between unity and multiplicity. Two-directional paths are especially emphasized in this tradition. The descent from Keter straight down through Tiferet, Yesod, and into Malkut is the path of manifestation, the unfolding of God as it materializes. And then we have the ascent from Malkut to Keter, and it can be completed in two ways, which is, number one, a direct vertical reversal of the descent, or a meandering multi-directional climb, which is known as the serpent path. The Kabbalists understood this as a cosmological and ontological principle inherent in nature itself, a reflection of the two roads to enlightenment. On the one hand, we have the passive, receptive, and introspective approach, juxtaposed with the active, adventurous, and expressive one. Across cultures and throughout history, humanity has rendered this duality in countless forms. We won't nail our mast, we won't nail our flag to the mast of any of these. We take them and we file them away in the background, right? Because the interest here is in studying the nature of things, the function of things, and the relevance of things. So these dualities have taken many names: masculine and feminine, yin and yang, good and evil, the sacred and profane, the sun and moon, fire and water, man and woman. In our own time, we can speak of this bifurcation through the lens of the brain's two hemispheres, as we said previously. The left hemisphere relates to the world as if it were an object, analytical, breaking experience into parts in an effort to claim total knowledge of a thing. Not understanding, of course, that the very essence of that thing may be killed in the dissection of it. And the right hemisphere, which relates to things as beings, as living creatures, right? We can form a relationship with a hammer. We can form a relationship with a pair of shoes, right? We no longer see them as things. We have living, dynamic relationships with objects, right? That's right hemisphere. We place some sort of sentience or some sort of character into inanimate objects. The right hemisphere is holistic. It seeks to capture the totality of a thing without chopping it up into its parts. It is contextual. It strives on understanding a thing by how it relates to something else, right? And the dance between the relationship between two things or two people. And it embraces the whole, right? The poet and the physicist represent these poles, or can, yet each can fluidly shift into the other. We have heaven and earth, mind and body, facts and feelings, the objective versus the subjective. And these are seemingly eternal pairs, right? A constant attempt by man to capture something that is intuitively understood and is empirically seen. Human experience continually confronts or projects this schism onto reality, onto the map of life itself. Whenever two tendencies arise toward the same situation, we are met with inner tension. We question which way to respond. Doubt enters almost every choice, creating significant pressure, or anxiety, if you will. When we cannot settle on one path or strike a balance, the mind and morality are at war. We can all recall moments when we wanted to say or do one thing but chose another, perhaps for social acceptability, politeness, or circumstance. The instinctual reaction is suppressed, replaced by a more measured response. This is especially vivid in childhood. As babies, toddlers, and young children, we naturally seek, demand, and pursue with unfiltered drive. That direct confronting energy requires wise, caring guidance to be nurtured and shaped. How a society tends to this natural tendency in children, whether it allows the waters to flow freely or lets them run dry, reveals much about its soul. The tree of life, with its pillars, spheres, and paths, remains a timeless mirror of this universal human journey, the eternal dance between who we are and who we may become. Built into the structure of the tree, before the tree actually becomes a visible tree, we have the concept of no thing or nothing. And one of the fundamental questions man has always had is how can something come from nothing? Right? And this nothing realm, or no thing realm, is known as the three veils of negative existence. And in Qabala, it represents the primordial pre-manifest stages beyond the tree of life, immediately preceding Keter, or the first point of manifestation. They describe the utterly transcendent divine reality before any emanation or differentiation occurs, and are traditionally named Ein, the no thing or the nothing, Ein Sof, which is without limit or infinite, and the Ein Sof Or, which is limitless light or infinite light. Let us not take these as sequential stages in a linear process, but rather layers or aspects of the absolute transcendence that veil the ineffable source from comprehension, right? So we all understand that, or we seem to understand that there must have been a starting point. There must be a source to the river. But as we begin to climb up the tree and to deal with things that are less and less physical and apparent to us, our ability to comprehend things, our mind seems to hit a wall, right? So in the Western esoteric Qabala, influenced by the Golden Dawn, Dion Fortune, and others, they are often depicted as three concentric veils or curtains above Keter, from which the divine light first condenses into the tree. The nothing or the no thing, Ein, is the highest and most radical veil. It can be understood in two profound yet contrasting ways. As total negation, which is a complete absence, void, or non-existence in the sense of absolute denial of all attributes, being, or thingness, right? The idea being that if you are to attempt to define it or label it, you're naturally implying the opposite of the word you use to denote this source. But if the thing we have as reality is to have come from something, then that thing would transcend any dualistic or oppositional naming or rendering, right? This reading aligns with a Hegelian conception of radical or total negation, as Hegel said, the night in which all cows are black, where the negation of everything leads to the emergence of determinate being through dialectical movement. In this view, Ein is the ground zero of absolute emptiness from which the dialectic of creation arises. And it's probably best to say here that the word nothing seems to send our minds into a scramble, right? Because if there was nothing as the source, then how does something come from the nothing? But if we put a little hyphen or dash between the no and the thing and consider it as a no thing, right? It cannot be denoted as a thing, right? So we cannot say that God is love, because to state that and to call the totality of existence as love we're implying hate. And if God is all powerful, omnipotent, right, omnipotent, it is everywhere, God is the totality of everything, then God must also have hate as a part of it. So therefore God cannot be just love. It must be love and hate, and whatever it is beyond that, right? So as no thing, not a mere nothingness, but that which transcends all categories, definitions, and oppositions. This is the more mystical and apophatic interpretation, closely echoing the thought of John Scotus Erigena, a 9th century Irish philosopher and theologian. Erigena, who was drawing on the Greek thinker Pseudo-Dionysius, describes the divine as super-essential, beyond being and non-being, beyond affirmation and negation. God is no thing, not because of lack, but because any thing would impose a limit, a division, or an opposition. The divine super-essentiality reconciles all contraries, containing both limit and limitlessness, without being bound by either. It is the transcendent unity prior to duality, where opposites are resolved in a higher, ineffable oneness. In Kabbalistic terms, Ein is the absolute negation that makes possible all subsequent manifestation, the ultimate not this and not that refuses every predicate. Ein Sof, the boundless, emerges from Ein Sof or Ein, the without end or infinite. Here the negation becomes boundless expansion, pure infinity without form, boundary, or attribute. It is the primal condition of limitless potentiality, the infinite space or void that is not yet defined. Ein Sof is still negative in the sense that it lacks any positive determination, yet it is the root of all possibility. In some interpretations, it represents the divine as infinite potential before any contraction or self-limitation allows for creation. The Ein Sof, or the third veil of negative existence. This is the first glimmer of positive manifestation, the infinite light that arises from the clash or tension between absolute negation and the boundless. It is the radiant aura or primal effulgence that precedes the condensation into Keter. In this light, the divine begins to become knowable or approachable, though still utterly transcendent. It symbolizes the first movement toward emanation, the let there be light in Genesis, before any structured creation. These three veils together form the pre-Keter realm of pure negativity or transcendence, beyond which human thought simply cannot reach, or at least struggles to reach. They are not things that exist in a conventional sense, but algebraic or symbolic pointers to the ineffable, that thing we just cannot create or cannot conceptualize, cannot express maybe. From Ein Sof, or the divine light contracts and emanates, giving rise to Keter, which is our first point on the entire tree of life. Now, I know that is a lot of probably blah blah, right? But it's just a different way of conceptualizing the very thing that we struggle to conceptualize, right? Trying to get something to stick a hook into. And finally, we can move on here now to something that is a little bit more satisfying to the senses, right? And you have two images in front of you. We're going to focus on the left-hand image first. And you can see that the left-hand image is the tree of life with the yellow lightning flash descending the tree, right? Coming into the top sphere, Keter, and then working its way to the right from Chokmah, to the left into Bina, diagonally down right into Hesed, left into Gebura, diagonally down right into Netzach, and left into Hod, before spilling down into Yesod and ultimately into the physical world, which is Malkut, or creating the physical world, right? And this is the creation myth, if you will, and it's also known as the path of the flaming sword, or also the lightning flash or the lightning bolt of creation, right? This is the Kabbalistic understanding, and perhaps like just loosely, okay? There's no need to fall into the idea or the tendency to want to prove this as true, right? Some things are simply beyond our ability to demonstrate with 100% facticity. This is how it was. Who can claim such a thing, right? We can speculate and theorize, and that's lovely. That is nourishing to the right hemisphere. Constantly be trying on new things without accepting them. You don't have to accept a new idea. You can try it on, look at the world through that idea for a few days or weeks or whatever. And what's useful you retain, and what is superfluous you reject, right? But this path of the flaming sword represents the descent of divine creative force through the Kabbalistic tree of life. This is a dynamic, as can be seen, zigzagging pathway that moves sideways and downward, tracing the sequential emanation of the 10 Sephiroth from the infinite divine source, the Ein Sof, which we've just discussed, into structured manifest reality. In Qabala, this path symbolizes the primordial act of creation itself, the unfolding of the universe from pure unity into multiplicity. This process mirrors the Genesis creation narrative, where God speaks the world into being through exactly 10 utterances. Quote, and God said, you'll find this in Genesis, right? And God said, end quote, which is repeated 10 times in Genesis 1. These 10 divine sayings align with the 10 Sephiroth as vessels or channels for creative energy. We have Keter, number 1, which is the initial divine will, or the supernal point, linked to the primordial in the beginning, or the first flash of creative intent. Chokmah, number 2, is let there be light, right? Total expansiveness, the flash of pure creative potential or idea. Following that, we have Bina, number 3, which is understanding. And the quote from Genesis is, let there be a firmament, right? Some sort of boundary. Bina is the boundary maker. We have structuring and differentiation, right? Separating the waters. Following that, we have Hesed, expansive giving. Let the waters be gathered and dry land appear, right? An outflow of abundance. We have expansiveness meeting boundary, which is creation itself, right? Life, potential, also within some sort of a boundary, right? Freedom is only defined by certain boundaries, right? Otherwise, it's just sheer expansiveness with no limitation imposed on it. Without the limitation of your physical body, are you still an individual? Or are you just a free-floating thinker, right? So limitation is not always bad. Following Hesed, we have Gebura, which is the middle on the left-hand side. And this is restrictive judgment. Vegetation bounded by kinds, right? The multiplicity. In the center, we have Tiferet, which is central balance. So in our solar system, what gives balance to it are the luminaries, the sun, the moon, and stars, to rule the day and night. Following from this, we have Netzach, which is endurance or drive, right? Where the waters bring forth creatures abundantly. The love of life and existence, right? We're getting closer to the material world here. And counter to that, we have Hod, which is form and reflection. The birds and sea life in structured kinds, right, in Genesis. And then near the end of the central pillar, we have Yesod, which is the luminary realm, right, the dreamy realm. And this is channeling connection, land, animals, and procreation, right? Yesod is also the domain of the sexual fluids, right? And then finally, number 10, we have physical manifestation in Malkut, which is known as the kingdom. Interestingly, it would be the kingdom of God, right? Because Keter is after unleashing and physically manifesting in the world as we have it. So we have the kingdom of God there, and humanity, which is created in God's image, right? Because if you fold the tree of life directly in half across the middle, you have Malkut landing on Keter. This downward movement embodies the divine impulse cascading through the tree's three pillars: mercy, severity, and equilibrium, bringing the infinite into the finite. In contrast, the path of the serpent, which you can see that on the right, represents the ascent, right? So we're not talking downward manifestation here. We're beginning with Malkut at the bottom, which is the physical world, the world of the senses, right? My body, what my eyes can see, what my ears can hear. And the path of the serpent meanders its way upward the tree. It represents the ascent, the human spiritual journey or psychological journey or mythological journey, if you will, back up the tree from Malkut, the world, toward reunion with the divine. This winding experiential path crosses between the pillars repeatedly, navigating the dialectical tension of opposites, good and evil, mercy and severity. It is the workable initiatory route through duality, leading to integration and enlightenment, if you like those words, right? But whatever way you want to call it, self-understanding or self-knowledge, meeting oneself. This dynamic is beautifully encapsulated in the Hermetic principle of as above, so below, right? What goes on in the cosmos is just a mirror of man's mind and vice versa. As above, so below asserts a profound correspondence between the macrocosm, which is the cosmic or divine realms, and the microcosm, which is the human or the individual realm of experience. Cosmologically, this principle has influenced a wide array of schools of thought, including ancient Hermeticism, which blended Egyptian, Greek, and Gnostic wisdom, Renaissance magic, alchemy, and Western esotericism, and even echoes in Eastern traditions like certain aspects of Tantra. It posits that patterns in the greater universe reflect in the smaller, and vice versa. You remember William Blake's to hold eternity in the palm of your hand, that sort of a thing. Yeah, it posits that patterns in the greater universe reflect in the smaller and vice versa, a fractal-like unity where the whole is mirrored in every part. Modern physics strongly resonates with this ancient insight through the holographic principle. This theory proposes that the information describing a three-dimensional volume of space, or our perceived reality, is encoded on its two-dimensional boundary, meaning the universe functions like a hologram, where each part contains information about the whole. This echoes Hermetic correspondence and Kabbalistic ideas of inter-inclusion, with every sephira containing aspects of the other, and the tree as a blueprint of interconnected wholeness. A particularly striking modern parallel comes from David Bohm's understanding of the implicate order, which is a deep, enfolded, holistic reality where everything is interconnected and enfolded into everything. He juxtaposes this with the explicate order, which is the unfolded or manifest world of separate forms which we perceive. Bohm's holographic universe is a contemporary scientific reflection of these ancient frameworks, where the apparent separation of things is illusory, and underlying unity or oneness, if you will, right, is fundamental. In essence, the flaming sword descent shows how divine unity creates diversity through ordered emanation, while the serpent descent reveals the path of return through conscious navigation of that diversity, a process now finding echoes in cutting-edge physics, suggesting that mystical traditions may have intuited truths about reality that science is only beginning to quantify now. This convergence points towards a timeless understanding, that being that the cosmos is not fragmented only, but is a profound and interconnected whole, depending on which way we perceive it. You will notice in the center of the image that there's a third image or a third rendering of the tree of life after been put in. And if you follow the arrow, you can see from Malkut, which is here I am now sitting in this chair, right? The physical world around me and my body. The aim of this path of ascent up the tree is straight up the middle. So you move from who you are in your physical body, right? And the aim is to go straight towards God. It sounds lovely, okay? And this is not to reject or to naysay against any path. It's just to not allow ourselves to walk away without understanding that the straight shot, the straight arrow up the middle, while it might get you to where you think you want to be going, if you look at the path of the arrow, you're missing out on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, right? Again, we have a William Blake understanding that the fool who will persist in his folly will become wise, right? And the straight path will allow us to stay relatively safe, right? We may not fall under the spell of totally absorbing passions, right? Of offering ourselves up totally at the feet of somebody else, right? Some unrequited love, or being totally submerged in the feeling towards something, right? We might miss out on that. We might stay perfectly neutral and harmonious the whole of our lives. And some temperaments are more suited to that, right? It is the safe passage. It is the middle road. But for others, there's going to be mistakes made along the way, and there might even be intentional meanderings into domains of excess. It depends on your temperament, right? Each of the previous paths will chart their own journey, but they need to use the paths that are on the tree, okay? We have 32 in all, with the 10 Sephiroth, the 10 spheres, being their own individual paths, known as the paths. And we also have the interconnecting arms that lead from one to the other, right? And they do exactly what they look like to do. They allow you to traverse from one domain to the next. So the 10 Sephiroth of the Kabbalistic tree of life represent states of being, fundamental moods, psychological tendencies, archetypal drives, and modes of consciousness that are universal to human nature. We encounter these aspects within ourselves, whether we seek them out or not. They are intrinsic to the structure of the psyche. The Sephiroth are interconnected by a network of 22 paths, which, together with the 10 spheres, constitute the traditional 32 paths of wisdom. Each Sephiroth or Sephira possesses its own distinct aim, drive, and personality, if you will, so that when two or more spheres interact, tension, conflict, or complementary influence naturally arises. Each path joins two Sephiroth and carries its own distinctive character, qualities, and transformative potential. In the Western esoteric tradition, these paths are mapped to the 22 major arcana of the tarot, which serve as symbolic keys to the flavor or the essence of each connection. Together, the tree and its paths form a comprehensive map of the archetypal world, right? Which is the deep structure of the human mind and soul. It paints a map of the terrain of the collective imagination of man, if you will. It is precisely from these inner parts of our nature and the tensions that emerge between them that stories, myths, and personal narratives are born. If you don't meet conflict along the way, you will always remain the same. And if you always remain the same, the likelihood of you changing or having to change is nil, which means you spend your life learning absolutely nothing about yourself. an impossibility. The paths introduce a third element, a mediating force, a way of resolution, or a synthesis that can integrate and transcend the opposing drives of the two spheres they connect. A classic example is the horizontal path between Hesed on the right-hand side in the middle and Qabala on the left-hand side in the middle. Hesed embodies the merciful king, the expansive impulse of unconditional benevolence and welcoming, charity and inclusion of the collective. Qabala, by contrast, is the prince who asserts boundaries, sovereignty, discipline, and the right to individual liberty and self-definition. Here we see the archetypal clash between the collective good and personal autonomy, between boundless giving and necessary limitation and boundary. The path that links these two aspects of personality is symbolized by the tarot card Lust, or Strength. The image is striking on this. It is of a naked woman who rides and gently masters a multi-headed wild beast, directing its raw power with joy and confidence rather than with force and suppression. Channeling one's desire for life, desire for I want, right? Lust, not in a sexual way only. This symbolism offers the resolution. The conflict between doing everything for others, which is an excess in Hesed, and doing everything only for the self, which is an excess in Qabala, is reconciled through the conscious mastery of instinct and passion. In some cases, the work involves taming the wild energies. In others, it requires unleashing the latent desires that have been repressed. Either way, the path teaches that true strength lies in the joyful, integrated command of one's inner forces, allowing mercy to be disciplined and boundaries to be compassionate. The fascinating thing about the tree is that you can learn, so you look at it, right? 22 paths, 10 spheres, 32 things to learn. Grand. But you will find that as you begin to draw around it, draw nearer to it, to pounce and grasp it, it disintegrates in your hands again, right? Because the tree also represents 4 worlds. And these provide a layered framework for understanding. And there's a bit to read here, right? But it's worth giving the time to it. And again, there's no expectation to remember all of this stuff upon hearing it, but you can dip in and out and go read yourself, right? And think about these things. So yes, we're talking in kind of occult language or poetic language, if you want, or symbolic language, but try and grasp some of the energies or some of the meanings that are coming up when you're talking about these things and see how they apply. You can run them through any kind of lens you want, right? And because we are men of modern days, the language we tend to use tends to be kind of neuroscience, biological language, right? So whatever images, whatever ideas, whatever feelings are at and are coming up, and when we're talking through this stuff, go along with that. Right, so we have the 4 worlds of the Qabala, and they provide a layered framework for understanding the descent of divine reality from the transcendent to the manifest. Right, from the incomprehensible to the comprehensible. In standard Hermetic Qabala, these 4 worlds correspond to the letters of the Tetragrammaton. Right, what does that mean? That is simply the name of God, right, in terms of the Christian sense, or the Judeo-Christian sense, if you want to call it that, right? Yahweh or Jehovah, and they are 4 letters, the Y, the H, the V, and the H. And each of these letters stands for one of these worlds, right? They also stand for many other things. The classical elements, right? Fire, water, air, and earth. And the suits of the tarot's minor arcana. The wands, the swords, the cups, and the discs. We have these 4 suits, right? They represent human tendencies as well. The wands are the will or the creative desire in man. The sword is the intellect. the cups the emotional world, and the discs is the physical world, or the world of the senses. These four worlds, we have absolute, which is the world of emanation, or the archetypal world, and this corresponds to fire, or the letter Yod, and the suit of wands. This is the highest, most primordial world, pure divine will, archetypal ideas, the primal creative force, and the initial spark of inspiration before any form of limitation arises. We have Bria, which is the world of creation. This corresponds to water, or the first H in Yod He Vav He, or Yehovah, and it corresponds to the water and to the suit of cups in the tarot. Here, pure ideas begin to take on emotional shape and feeling. This realm is characterized by intuition, nurturing, formative creation, relational potential, and the heart-centered unfolding of divine essence. The third world, we have Yetzirah, which is the world of formation, and it corresponds to air, or the letter Vav, and the suit of wands. This is the intellectual and structuring plane, the realm of thought, discrimination, patterns, communication, plans, and conflict. It is where ideas are refined, analyzed, and given mental form through clarity, or division. And then we have Asiya, or Asiya, the world of action, or manifestation. This corresponds to earth, the suit of discs, and the physical world. This is the lowest and most concrete world. It is physical reality, materiality, the body, stability, resources, and the tangible domain where all higher energies finally find ground and become embodied. These four worlds map directly to core human tendencies and psychological orientations, as we said. We have fire, or wands, which is the creative drive, passion, will, initiative, the impulse to begin and to inspire. With water and cups, we find the emotional depth, intuition, relationships, receptivity, feeling, and the capacity for connection. With the element of air and the suit of swords, we have the intellect, analysis, communication, mental clarity, discernment, and the power of thought. And fundamentally, with earth and the suit of discs, we find the physicality, the body, resources, manifestation, the tangible things of existence, right? Together, the four worlds illustrate the complete cycle of emanation, from the fiery spark of pure will, through emotional formation and intellectual patterning, to full physical expression. They remind us that every creative act, emotional experience, thought, and material reality is a reflection of this divine descent, and that the journey of return through conscious awareness can ascend back through the same worlds towards unity. I know now that most people who listen to whatever I'm saying are Irish people, right? And naturally, I'm an Irish person myself, so my interest begins and ends with Ireland, right? And not just Ireland of today, but particularly Ireland of yesteryear, right? Of previous ages. And building on the four worlds, the correspondences of the four elements, and also the four suits of the tarot, we find something really fascinating here, which is not too often explored, and poses many questions, right? Because corresponding to what we previously said of the four worlds and the rest of it, we find with a cursory reading of Irish mythology, nearly on page 1 of any good Irish mythology book, right? Especially Lady Gregory's rendition of the Irish myths, we are introduced to the four treasures of Ireland. And according to early Irish texts, so the Leabhar Qabala Éireann, right? So the taking of Ireland, or the invasions of Ireland, we find that the Tuatha Dé Danann, or the Tuatha Dé Danann, arrived in Ireland from four legendary cities or islands, where they said to have mastered druidry, wisdom, prophecy, and magic. Each city provided one treasure. We have Phalius, which brought the Leofal, or the Stone of Destiny, or the Disc, right, or the Pentacle, or the Plate, as they're known as well, which is said to have been a coronation stone that cried out or roared under the rightful King of Ireland. It symbolized sovereignty, truth, and rightful rule. Right, so the body never lies, sort of a thing. We have Gorius, and from here was brought the sword, often known as the sword of Nuada, or sometimes associated with Lu. Right, and what's interesting about this sword, again, the sword corresponds with the element of air, which corresponds with the world of the intellect. And this is said to have been an unbeatable sword that once drawn, no enemy could escape. It represents justice, decisive action, and cutting through illusion. And the name of this sword is fascinating, right? Because when we're asked a question, we use our thinking, our intellect to answer it, right? And this sword's name was Anfragarach, which is the answerer. Right? So are we talking about a sword here, a physical sword, or are we talking about a symbolic explanation of the mind of man itself? Right? Something to think on. We then have Phineas, and from Phineas was brought the spear of Lu, or the spear of victory, an unstoppable spear that never missed and ensured victory in battle. It embodies directed will, precision, and fiery conquest, right? So the wand, or the spear, corresponds with the element of fire, which corresponds with imagination or desire, right? The creative faculty in man, the natural will to be. And naturally, if you are living a congruent life where your actions, your desires, your thinking, and your will all line up, you become an unstoppable spear that never misses and ensures victory in battle, right? So it assures yourself a good life, a meaningful life. So again, are we talking about a spear, or are we talking about a symbolic representation of the creative faculty in man, the desire to be, to express one's natural will? And the fourth treasure comes from Murius, from which was brought the cauldron of the Dagda, the good god, or the cauldron of plenty, right? Corresponding with the cauldron is naturally the cup. The cup corresponds with the world of the emotions and corresponds with the element of water. And we see this as well in turns of phrase that we have, right? So when someone is angry, when they're filled with a passion and an emotion, we say their blood is boiling, right? My blood is boiling. Blood, of course, is a liquid, which falls into the category of water, right? Or a cup, an emotion. So you can see how the correspondences end up being captured in little turns of phrase that we still use today, right? And it's perfectly consistent across many, many ages. So these Irish myths, whilst they might have been recorded in 6th, 7th, up to the 12th century, these stories are naturally far older than that, right? Just because something is recorded in a particular time does not mean that that is the beginning of that story. Naturally not, right? So this cauldron of plenty, the cup of emotion, it is said to be an inexhaustible vessel of abundance that fed any number without emptying and could revive the dead. It symbolizes nourishment, regeneration, emotional healing waters, and boundless provision, right? And you see this, so with the cauldron of plenty, it's said that it could revive the dead. Now, as we're speaking of the cup and the waters and the world of emotion, what is someone who has lost the ability to experience emotion, right? That we call that depression. Depression is probably 1 or 2 steps away from death itself, right? It is a living death where nothing seems to matter to you anymore. It's almost as if you're standing just outside of yourself, kind of watching yourself in life. The things and the encounters in life no longer move you. What does move you is emotion. Which is continuously denigrated in these times, right? Emotion is seen to be the domain of the child, right? And the aim of life is to rinse all emotional reactions to anything out of you, at least in the times that we're living in, right? And this is a sickness that many humans are after adopting and internalizing, and judging other people through that lens too, right? Where to be emotional is to be non-rational, right? Well, of course, it is to be non-rational because you're being emotional, but you're being emotional because you have a feeling for something, and to have a feeling for something means that something matters to you. And if something matters to you, it means that you have certain values that you live by. And if you have certain values that you live by, it means that you have a felt sense of morality in this world, right? Which means you have a certain sense of who you are as a distinct human being. So when people are trying to denigrate the world of emotion and render it as secondary to the world of the intellect or the world of reason, they're trying to extract your ability to relate to the world as a distinct individual from you, because we do this through the world of feeling, emotions, right? And as Irish people, we are emotional people, naturally. So to try and put on the hat of we are all these scientists who are devoid of the subjective element of existence, that is a poison. Because the subjective element of existence is just another way of saying your individuality. You're being subjective here. And there's a time and a place for them arguments, right? But when it's a blanket statement or a blanket approach to the denigration of the emotional world, what is being targeted there is your felt sense of existence, how you feel about life itself, which is a result of your individuality. We see here naturally that the 4 treasures fit perfectly onto the tarot suit. We have the suits, the elements, the 4 worlds, and it shows a deep archetypal resonance between Celtic or Irish myth, I prefer Irish myth, and the Hermetic Qabala. I would imagine that people's attention is immediately drawn to the center image, right, which is known as Baphomet. People might consider this satanic, and off you go, do as you want, right? But I would encourage people to understand that in order to consider something satanic, you must understand that you're operating or you're doing that because you're situated in the domain of a particular worldview, right? So the bad man rarely considers himself bad. He always considers himself as doing good in some way, right? So it's kind of situational. So by our reaction to an image, a lot of the time, that reaction tells us more about where we are and where we're coming from, rather than what it tells us about the image itself, right? And there's a reason why I put that image in there, and I'll go through it, right? So we've seen Malkut, which is number 10 on the tree of life, which is the realm or the sphere of physical manifestation, the world around us. It is the physical world and the lowest sephira on the tree of life, the final stop in physical manifestation, but not the end, right? There is no end, really. Malkut is ultimately an emanation of Keter, the crown, and requires Keter's presence to manifest at all. Yet when we attempt to dissect Malkuth into its component parts, left hemisphere, probing the material realm with ever finer analysis, a trapdoor swings open into what has been called the quantum realm, right? When we try and drill down into the smallest things of existence, right? All of a sudden, the sand just falls through our fingers, and our everyday logic falters and seems to mock us with paradoxes. In this sense, Keter is present within Malkuth, though in a radically different mode. The initial point of creation and divine unity is secretly held and expressed by the physical world itself. This perspective, which long predates Christianity, affirms the immanence of spirit or God within the natural world. As the philosopher Friedrich Schelling expressed it, nature is visible spirit. Spirit is invisible nature. The Qabala, while distinguishing the Sephirot as different stages or qualities of emanation, insists that there is no fundamental difference in kind, only in degrees of revelation, between the highest unity of Keter and the most concrete manifestation in Malkuth. Ultimately, what we have the upstretched arm and the downward pointing arm, right? We see that in the left, the image on the left, which is the magician in the tarot. We see it in the center, in Baphomet, right? The upward and downward pointing. And we see that in the third image, which is the mirrored cosmos and man's mind. Making, look, you can see it, right? The Star of David, if you will. The upward triangle and the downward triangle interpenetrating, right? There's no separation between the cosmos and man, or between God and human beings, right? In the physical world, in nature, God is present. There's no separation between both, which means that there is no hierarchy between both. We do not elevate one above the other. What we do in this realm, the physical world, has an impact and is an expression of God itself, if you will. It's a totally different theology than what we've been used to in the West. However, it is a theology that predates the status quo theology that we've suffered with, or that we've held or even adored over the last 1500 to 2000 years, right? So it's so old that it's new. And buried deep in the caverns of our minds, individually and collectively, there is an understanding of this, right? That the natural world is just as holy as the holiest of holies. What we have here now is the natural tree of life on the left, and then what looks like an inversion of it in black, right? And this particular aspect of the tree of life is one of the reasons why I chose it, to try and highlight some things that I think are going wrong with people, and that can be used as a way of steadying the ship for many people, right? Because we kind of start moving away from the speculative talk into the world of psychology here, right? And I'll get back to that in a second, but first I just want to talk a little bit about, these are called the shells, right? So at the bottom of Malkuth, the tree, as I said earlier, right, you think you have a grasp on it, and then it just falls apart into other aspects, and you begin to have to learn things all over again, right? So we have the inversion of the natural order, if you will, in the black, or the upside down tree. Upside down, right? Keep that in mind too, right? Because that's something that the whole world has been embroiled in over the last year particularly, and over the last 10 years with Stranger Things, right? This upside down idea, the inversion of nature, or the inversion of the world as we are used to it, at least. And these are like the darker or the shadow elements of the Sephirot. So as we had 10 spheres, we have their shadow aspect as well. And these are called the Qlīphot. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, some people might think, but that's the way I pronounce it. The qliphoth, which are called the shells, the husks, or the peels. And these represent the shadow, the inverted or unbalanced counterparts to the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, embodying chaotic, impure, or destructive spiritual forces, often called the Tree of Death or the other side, right? Or, as I said, the upside down. And where this bleeds into the world of psychology is in the thinking of Carl Jung and his concept of the shadow. And put simply, Jung said, quote, "How can I be substantial if I do not cast a shadow? I must have a dark side also if I am to be whole," end quote. Right? And something that has been evident so far and will continue to be is the interplay between opposites, or what appear to be opposites. But on deeper reflection, we find that there's very little in terms of separation between love and hate, feeling and thinking, right? They seem to be just expressions of something which is beyond the duality of them, right? So just as we have the performative parts of ourselves that we love showing off, right? The parts that we want to highlight to others and to ourselves, that highlight, just as a stage performer has, right, the main light shining on them, that highlight will cast a shadow. So the glory that we want to show to the world also causes us to have, naturally, if there's aspects we prefer, there are aspects that we do not prefer. If there are tendencies we wish to continuously demonstrate and perform for the world and to the world, there are naturally the counterpoint to those. This is the realm of the qliphoth. And we're going to get into this when we begin to discuss each of the individual spheres, right? Because the names on these qliphoth are fascinating, and they point to human complexes, human tensions and problems, psychological issues that we continuously run into as people, right? Because they're ever present. They are the burden of being human, right? The burden of having the mind that we do. And hopefully, again, as I said, or as I aim to say at least, take all these things as you will, and hopefully have a look at yourself through these things, right? That's ultimately the aim of what I'm doing here. Whether you believe this to be true or whatever the case is, I don't care, right? I don't care. All I could say to that is that man has found these symbols, the relationships between these different symbols, the myths, the elements, the names of God, the four worlds, the realms, right? All of these things. Man has found these to be useful enough to retain them. Many people have died for expressing these things across these centuries, yet they persist. That would compel a curious mind to wish to understand why people would give up their lives to defend and protect and to express certain opinions, ideas, and relationships between them. And so to review what we've gone over, right? We went over the negative existence, the preceding existence, if you can call it that, prior to God, right? We went over the different paths, the different ways of climbing the tree. We had the descent, the path of the flaming sword, the unfolding of God into existence or manifestation. And we looked at the path of self-development or discovery, which is the ascent up the tree and the different paths that can be taken. The straight vertical arrow up the tree, or the serpent path of meandering through the different spices and flavor of human life, right? Learning through pain, learning through excess, and learning through lack as well. We had the four worlds and the correlation between them and the symbols in Irish mythology. We understood that God and creation are not to be seen as separate points, right? God is, the physical world is God made manifest, if you will. We came across the darker side of all of these traits, or the Clifot, the shells, and Carl Jung's idea of the psychological shadow. Now, moving forward, what we're going to be looking at, because you could take all of what has just been said or leave it. I just wanted to give people a simple overview of the structure of the Tree of Life, so that when I begin to talk about it individually, there's probably a background image of the thing in totality, right? So we're hitting both the left hemisphere of specificity and the right hemisphere of totality at the same time, and we're bouncing between both, right? And in order to do that, we get super specific on one thing, we chop it up, we look at its individual tendencies, and then we understand it by its contextual relationship with other aspects of the thing, ultimately leading to breathing life into what is a dead symbol or picture on your screen, right? So that is what I'll be doing next. We will begin with Malkuth, and I will be trying to pull in as many different fields of human interest and exploration as possible to try and really animate the distinct elements on the Tree of Life, and to begin to paint a picture and explore the terrain, which is man's relationship with man. Our relationship with our bodies, with our dreams, with our feelings, with our mind, with our desire for societal good, our striving to be individuals, right? The whole lot of it. The whole lot of it. So hopefully you got something from this and you can follow it along, and I will see you the next time when we delve into the world of the physical.